I'm Eleanor, 67 years old, a retired teacher from Kansas. After Richard passed away 5 years ago, I thought my daughter Margaret would be my rock. She was loving once, before money changed her. It started small, her taking control of my finances after Richard died, saying she was helping. That night at dinner when I finally questioned the missing money, her face transformed with rage. She pulled me into the kitchen, hissed, "Don't you ever question me in front of my kids," and threatened to put me in a home. Before I share how this painful betrayal unfolded, take a moment to share where you're watching from, and subscribe if financial elder abuse awareness matters to you. Richard and I built a simple but comfortable life in our small Kansas town. We weren't wealthy by any measure, but with 42 years of marriage and careful planning, we had managed to save enough for a peaceful retirement. Our modest 3-bedroom house was paid off, we had about $300,000 in retirement accounts, and we had set aside money for emergencies. Richard always said, "Save for the storm while the sun is shining," and we followed that philosophy our entire married life. Our daughter Margaret was our only child. She and her husband Frank lived about 20 minutes away with our 2 grandchildren, Abigail and Ethan. Those children were the light of our lives. Abigail, a thoughtful 14-year-old who inherited my love for books, and Ethan, an energetic 11-year-old who reminded me so much of Richard with his mechanical aptitude. We had Sunday dinners together almost every week, and Richard and I attended every school event and recital. Margaret seemed to have inherited our values, working as a nurse at the local hospital while Frank ran a moderately successful insurance agency. Richard and I had a good retirement plan. We had our wills, healthcare directives, and financial plans organized with the help of our family attorney. Richard was always methodical about these things, which became even more important when he was diagnosed with heart disease in his early 60s. As his health declined over 3 years, he took extra care to make sure I would be financially secure after he was gone. "Eleanor," he told me during one of his better days, "I've made sure everything is set up for you. The accounts are accessible, the insurance policies are clear, and our attorney has all the documents. Margaret knows where everything is too, just in case you need help, but you should be able to manage just fine." When Richard passed away after a final heart attack, the grief hit me like a physical blow. We had been together since high school, and suddenly living alone in our house felt impossible. The silence was deafening. Simple tasks like checking the mail or making dinner for one person seemed pointless. I found myself sitting in Richard's chair for hours, just holding his sweater and trying to catch his scent before it faded forever. During those dark early days of grief, Margaret was there daily. She brought food, helped me sort through Richard's belongings, and sat with me when the tears wouldn't stop. When she offered to help with the financial matters, it seemed like a blessing. My mind was foggy with grief, and numbers swam before my eyes when I tried to focus on bills or account statements. "Mom, you shouldn't have to worry about this right now," Margaret said, her arm around my shoulders. "Let me take care of the finances for a while. Dad showed me where everything is, and I can make sure all the bills are paid on time." I gratefully accepted her help. It seemed like one less burden during an overwhelming time. Margaret set up online access to all my accounts and offered to handle the insurance claims and pension paperwork. She even suggested I add her name to my accounts, just to make things easier. At the time, it made perfect sense. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my independence began to slip away. First, it was Margaret suggesting I was too distracted to drive safely, offering to take me to appointments and grocery shopping. Then it was concerns about me living alone. What if you fall and nobody is there to help? Before I fully realized what was happening, she had convinced me to rent out my house and move in with her family, just until you're feeling more like yourself. What was meant to be temporary stretched into months. My house, filled with 40 years of memories with Richard, was rented to strangers. Most of my belongings were in storage, and I was living in Margaret's guest bedroom surrounded by just a few personal items. My car sat unused in their driveway until Margaret suggested selling it since, "You're not driving anyway, Mom." The financial control tightened gradually. Margaret explained that it made sense for her to keep my checkbook and bank cards since she was handling all my expenses. "It's just more convenient this way," she insisted. "You don't need to worry about a thing." My world shrank as time passed. Old friends called less frequently when Margaret repeatedly told them I wasn't feeling up to visitors. My sister Patricia, who lived in Oregon, sent letters that I later discovered Margaret had intercepted. The weekly bridge club I had attended for 20 years somehow fell away from my calendar. Even my volunteer work at the library stopped when Margaret insisted I needed more rest. Looking back, I can see how skillfully she isolated me. By the time I began to question things, I was already cut off from my support network, living under her roof, and completely dependent on her goodwill. I had gone from an independent widow to something closer to a child, asking permission for the smallest expenses, and having no real knowledge of my own financial situation. The first time I noticed something wasn't right was about 8 months after moving in with Margaret. I had asked for some cash to buy birthday gifts for Abigail, and Margaret handed me $60 with a sigh, as though I was being extravagant. This struck me as odd, considering I knew my monthly pension alone was over $2,000, not to mention the retirement savings. Is there something wrong with my accounts? I asked, noticing her reluctance. Everything's fine, Mom, she answered quickly. It's just that there are a lot of expenses these days. The economy, you know. She changed the subject before I could ask more questions. A few weeks later, I requested to see my most recent bank statement, thinking it reasonable to stay informed about my own money. Margaret seemed annoyed but promised to print one out for me. Somehow, she never got around to it despite my gentle reminders. It's complicated, Mom, became her standard response. Trust me, I'm taking care of everything. As months passed, I noticed a pattern. Whenever I asked about finances, Margaret would either become irritated, change the subject, or provide vague reassurances. When I requested specific amounts or information, she would say things like, "Why are you so worried about money? Don't you trust me?" Or, "You never used to be so obsessed with money, Mom. Is something wrong?" This subtle gaslighting made me question myself. Was I becoming paranoid? Ungrateful? After all, Margaret and Frank had opened their home to me and were handling all my affairs. Maybe I was being overly suspicious, but the concerns wouldn't fade. I began to notice other troubling signs. Margaret and Frank, who had always lived modestly, suddenly renovated their kitchen with high-end appliances. They traded in both their cars for newer models. Frank mentioned a vacation property they were considering during dinner one night, before Margaret quickly shushed him with a meaningful look. Meanwhile, whenever I needed anything, Margaret emphasized how expensive everything was becoming. When my winter coat needed replacing, she brought home a second-hand one from a thrift store. When I mentioned wanting to send Ethan and Abigail to summer camp, using my own money, Margaret insisted we couldn't afford such luxuries. The grandchildren began to notice the inconsistencies too. One afternoon, while Margaret and Frank were out, Abigail approached me cautiously. "Grandma," she said, "is everything okay with your money? I heard Mom telling Dad that your accounts are helping them with the new kitchen, but then yesterday she told you that you couldn't afford a new pair of shoes." My heart sank at her words, but I reassured her that everything was fine, not wanting to burden her with adult concerns. Still, her observation confirmed my growing suspicions. Around the same time, my old neighbor Judith called Margaret's house asking for me. By chance, I answered the phone myself. "Eleanor, I've been worried sick," Judith exclaimed. "I haven't seen you in months, and when I came by your house, the new tenant said you'd moved out nearly a year ago." We talked briefly before Margaret came home, but that short conversation was a lifeline to my old world. Judith promised to visit soon, though somehow Margaret always managed to ensure I was at a doctor's appointment or otherwise unavailable whenever Judith tried to come by. The turning point came when I accidentally discovered bank statements in the recycling bin. Margaret had apparently forgotten to shred them as usual. With shaking hands, I pulled them out and felt my blood run cold. There were large transfers from my accounts to accounts I didn't recognize, withdrawals for amounts that had never been given to me, and my balances were significantly lower than they should have been. One statement showed a withdrawal of $47,000 with the description "home improvement loan." I had never authorized such a transaction. Another showed regular monthly transfers of $3,000 to an account labeled only with initials. I carefully returned the statements to the recycling bin, my mind racing. That night, I lay awake trying to reconcile the daughter I thought I knew with someone who would steal from her own mother. I thought of all the times Richard had praised Margaret's integrity. Had our daughter always had this capacity for deception, or had something changed her? The hardest part was admitting to myself that I had been naive. All the signs had been there, from the isolation to the controlling behavior, but I had made excuses because I couldn't face the truth. My own daughter was systematically stealing my retirement, while keeping me dependent and in the dark. As painful as this realization was, it also awakened something in me that had been dormant since Richard died. My determination. I might be older, I might be grieving, but I was still Eleanor Jenkins, who had taught high school English for 30 years, who had stood up to budget cuts and school board politics, who had survived losing the love of her life. I would not be a victim any longer. I decided to bide my time and gather more information before confronting Margaret. I began paying closer attention to conversations about finances, noting dates and amounts mentioned. I started looking through the mail when no one was home, searching for more evidence. And I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation that would change everything. The family dinner that changed everything happened on a Thursday in April. I had been planning my approach for weeks, waiting for the right moment when both Margaret and Frank would be present, along with the children. Something in me wanted witnesses, even if they were family members who might take Margaret's side. I had spent the afternoon helping Abigail with her English homework, reviewing her essay on To Kill a Mockingbird, one of my favorite novels to teach during my years in the classroom. There was something poetic about discussing a book centered on justice and moral courage on the same day I planned to stand up for myself. Margaret had prepared pot roast, Richard's old favorite, and the kitchen was filled with familiar, comforting aromas. As we sat around the dining table, the conversation flowed normally at first. Frank talked about a difficult client at his insurance agency. Ethan described his science project on renewable energy. Abigail mentioned her upcoming school dance. I watched Margaret serving food, playing the role of the devoted daughter and mother, and wondered how someone could compartmentalize so completely. I waited until everyone had been served and the initial hunger satisfied. The timing needed to be right, not too early when the interruption would cause resentment, not too late when people might start leaving the table. About 15 minutes into the meal, during a natural lull in conversation, I cleared my throat. "Margaret," I began, keeping my voice steady and calm, "I'd like to discuss something important about my finances." The change in her expression was immediate but subtle. A flash of alarm quickly replaced by a practiced smile. "Mom, we can talk about that later in private," she said with a nervous laugh. "Let's not bore everyone with money talk during dinner." "I think now is a good time," I replied, feeling a strange calm. After all, family finances affect the whole family. Frank stopped eating, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. The children glanced between us, sensing the sudden tension. "I was going through some old papers yesterday," I continued, the carefully crafted lie coming easily, "and I noticed a withdrawal from my retirement account for $47,000 last month. I don't recall authorizing that transaction. Can you explain it?" The color drained from Margaret's face. For a moment, she seemed genuinely at a loss for words, her eyes darting to Frank, who suddenly became very interested in his plate. "That must be a mistake," she finally said, her voice tight. "You know I've been handling everything carefully. There are lots of expenses for your care, Mom." $47,000 worth of care in 1 month? I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That seems excessive, especially since I'm living here and my medical insurance covers most of my healthcare costs." Ethan and Abigail were watching wide-eyed now. Frank still hadn't looked up from his plate. "Frank," I said, turning to my son-in-law, "did you know about this withdrawal?" Before he could answer, Margaret stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mom, come help me get the dessert ready," she said, her voice strained with forced pleasantness. It wasn't a request. I followed her into the kitchen, aware that this confrontation was about to escalate. As soon as we were out of earshot of the dining room, Margaret turned on me, her face contorted with an anger I had never seen before. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but intense. "How dare you question me like that in front of my family? Your family?" I repeated, noticing her choice of words. They're my family too, Margaret. And it's my money we're talking about. Don't you ever question me in front of my kids, she snapped, jabbing a finger toward my face. Do you have any idea what we've given up to take care of you? The sacrifices we've made. Sacrifices paid for with my retirement savings, it seems, I replied, finding courage in my anger. Money your father and I worked our entire lives to save. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. You ungrateful old woman. You think you could manage on your own? Without me, you'd be in some state-run nursing home with nobody visiting you. Is that what you want? What I want is an explanation for where my money has gone, I insisted. And access to my own accounts. Margaret let out a cold laugh. You want explanations? Fine. The truth is you're spending more than you have. Your precious retirement wasn't as substantial as you and Dad thought. The medical bills, the special diets, the accommodations we've had to make to our home, your endless prescriptions, it all adds up. I knew she was lying. Richard had been meticulous about our finances, and my medical needs were minimal, covered almost entirely by Medicare and our supplemental insurance. Then show me the statements, I challenged. Show me where the money has been going. I don't have to show you anything, she hissed. I have power of attorney. I'm in charge now. I never gave you power of attorney, I said, though a sick feeling in my stomach made me wonder if I had signed something without understanding it during those foggy days of grief. Margaret stepped closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Listen carefully, Mom. If you ever bring up money again, especially in front of the kids or Frank, I'll have you declared incompetent so fast your head will spin. I've been documenting your memory lapses, your confusion, your erratic behavior. One word from me and your nurse daughter, and you'll be in a facility with no say in anything. Is that clear? The viciousness of her threat left me speechless. This was not my daughter, not the little girl I had raised, taught to ride a bike, comforted through her first heartbreak. Or perhaps it was, and I had never truly known her. Now pull yourself together, Margaret continued, grabbing a pie from the counter. We're going back out there, and you're going to apologize for bringing up such a distressing topic at dinner, and blame it on your confusion. Then we'll never speak of this again. I followed her back to the dining room in stunned silence. The remainder of the meal passed in a blur. I mumbled some apology as instructed, too shocked by Margaret's transformation to resist. Frank avoided eye contact with everyone. Ethan looked confused, but Abigail watched me with concern in her eyes, seeing more than her mother realized. That night, lying in bed in the guest room that never quite felt like mine, I made my decision. I would not confront Margaret again, not directly. It was clear she was prepared to use my age against me, to paint me as confused or incompetent. I needed help, documentation, and a plan. Most importantly, I needed to get out of that house before Margaret could make good on her threats. As the household slept, I silently vowed that this would be the last night I spent under my daughter's roof as her prisoner. Tomorrow, I would begin to reclaim my life and my dignity. The next morning, I waited until Margaret left for her nursing shift. Frank headed to his office, and the children were safely at school. The empty house felt different now, less like a trap and more like an opportunity. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone in the kitchen and dialed a number I knew by heart, one I hadn't called in far too long. Harold Wilson had been Richard's best friend since college, and had served as our family attorney until his retirement 3 years ago. He and his wife Susan had tried to stay in touch after Richard's death, but Margaret had gradually intercepted their calls and visits like she had with everyone else. Eleanor. Harold's voice was surprised but warm when he answered. It's wonderful to hear from you. We've been worried. My carefully constructed composure cracked at the sound of his familiar voice, and I found myself sobbing into the phone, the whole story pouring out in a jumbled rush. Harold listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his attorney's mind still sharp despite retirement. This is serious, Eleanor, he said when I finally finished. What Margaret's doing isn't just unethical, it's illegal. It's financial elder abuse, plain and simple. The term hit me hard. Elder abuse. That happened to other people, neglected in nursing homes or scammed by strangers, not to retired teachers living with their daughters. But Harold was right, and naming it somehow made it more real and less my fault. I need to get out of here, I told him. And I need proof of what she's done. Susan and I would be happy to have you stay with us, Harold offered immediately. But you're right about needing evidence. Without documentation, it would be your word against hers, and she's clearly prepared to question your competence. We formulated a plan. I would try to access Margaret's home office where she kept financial documents. Harold would contact his former law firm to connect me with an attorney specializing in elder abuse cases. Most importantly, I would need to leave Margaret's house without alerting her to my suspicions. Be careful, Eleanor, Harold warned before we hung up. If Margaret realizes you're gathering evidence or planning to leave, she might accelerate her efforts to control you or your assets. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table, my teacher's instinct for planning taking over. I had approximately 7 hours before anyone returned home. I needed to use that time efficiently. Margaret's home office was on the second floor, always kept locked. I had noticed where she hid the key, however, on top of the doorframe, thinking herself clever. With the house to myself, I retrieved the key and entered her private domain for the first time. The office was meticulously organized, with a desk, computer, filing cabinets, and bookshelves. I didn't dare try to access her computer, but the filing cabinets seemed promising. Starting with the one labeled Family, I began carefully searching through folders. In the third drawer, I found a folder with my name. Inside were copies of my bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies, and property documents for my house, which was still in my name but generating rental income one had never seen. There was also a document that made my blood run cold. A power of attorney form with what appeared to be my signature, though I had no memory of signing it. Looking more closely, I noticed slight differences between that signature and my actual handwriting. Had Margaret forged my signature? I took photos of everything using the small digital camera I had kept hidden in my room, one of the few possessions I had managed to keep private. The bank statements confirmed my worst fears. Regular large withdrawals, transfers to accounts in Margaret and Frank's names, a home equity loan taken out against my house without my knowledge or consent. In less than 2 years, they had depleted almost 2/3 of my retirement savings. At the current rate, I would be completely broke within another year. I was photographing a particularly damning document, showing a transfer of $85,000 to an account labeled Beach House Down Payment, when I heard a car in the driveway. Panic surged through me as I quickly returned the papers to their folder, and the folder to the cabinet. I had been so engrossed in my discovery that I had lost track of time. Hurrying out of the office, I locked the door and replaced the key on the doorframe. I had barely made it halfway down the stairs when the front door opened, and Margaret walked in, returning home unexpectedly for lunch. "Mom," she called, sounding surprised to see me on the stairs. "What are you doing up there?" "Just using the bathroom," I lied, grateful that there was indeed a bathroom on the second floor. The downstairs one was out of toilet paper. She gave me an odd look but seemed to accept the explanation. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain she must hear it, but I maintained a calm exterior, decades of classroom management serving me well. "I forgot some paperwork for a patient," Margaret explained, heading toward her office. "Thought I'd grab lunch while I was home too. Have you eaten?" "Not yet," I replied, continuing down the stairs at what I hoped was a normal pace. I was just about to make a sandwich. As she unlocked her office door, I escaped to the kitchen, hands still shaking from the close call. I needed to accelerate my plans. Margaret's unexpected return was a reminder that I couldn't predict her movements, and each day I remained increased the risk of discovery. That afternoon, while Margaret was back at work, I called my bank using the kitchen phone. I intended to freeze my accounts, only to discover that my worst fears were confirmed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Jenkins," the bank representative said after verifying my identity, "but your accounts have almost no funds remaining. The main savings account shows a balance of $320, and your checking account has $214. Accounts that should have contained hundreds of thousands of dollars, reduced to pocket change." I thanked the representative and hung up, a strange calm replacing my earlier panic. There was nothing more Margaret could take from those accounts. The damage was done. My next call was to my sister Patricia in Oregon. We had been close once, before Margaret began intercepting her calls and letters. When she answered, her voice filled with emotion at hearing from me directly for the first time in over a year. "Ellie? Is it really you?" she asked, using my childhood nickname. "I've been so worried. I've written dozens of letters, called so many times. Margaret always says you're resting or at appointments." "I'm sorry, Patricia," I said, fighting back tears. "I didn't know. Margaret has been controlling everything, including my contact with the outside world." I explained the situation as concisely as I could. Without hesitation, Patricia offered what I desperately needed, a safe place to go. "I can be on a plane tomorrow," she insisted. "I'll come get you, bring you back to Oregon with me." "No," I decided, thinking quickly. "That would alert Margaret. I need to leave quietly, when no one expects it." We made arrangements for Patricia to fly in 2 days later. She would get a hotel room nearby, and I would somehow make my escape to meet her. In the meantime, I needed to pack essentials without raising suspicion, and secure the evidence I had gathered. The next day was Friday, and I knew the family would be attending Ethan's baseball game in the evening. I declined to go, complaining of a mild headache, which Margaret accepted without much concern. This gave me the perfect opportunity to pack a small suitcase with essential clothing, medications, and my few remaining valuables, including the wedding ring I had removed during dishwashing and hidden away. I wrote a brief note, not wanting to leave without any explanation. "Margaret, I need some time away to think about things. Please don't worry or try to find me. I am safe and with family. Mom." I placed it on my neatly made bed, a bed I would never sleep in again. The note revealed nothing of my true intentions or knowledge, hopefully buying me the time I needed. When Patricia texted that she had arrived at her hotel, I called a taxi using the landline, instructing the driver to park down the block and wait. I took one last look around the room that had been my prison for nearly 2 years, picked up my small suitcase and purse containing the camera with my evidence, and walked out the front door. The evening air felt different somehow, charged with possibility and freedom. As the taxi drove me away from Margaret's house, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for the daughter I had lost, fear of the uncertain future, but most of all, a sense of reclaiming my independence that brought tears to my eyes. Patricia was waiting at the hotel entrance, and the moment she saw me, she rushed forward to embrace me. We held each other and cried, sisters reunited after too long apart. "You're safe now," she whispered. "We'll figure this out together." That night, as I lay in the hotel bed beside my sleeping sister, my phone lit up with messages and missed calls from Margaret, who had returned home to find me gone. I turned off the phone without reading them. Tomorrow would be soon enough to face the consequences of my escape. Tonight was for rest, and the first peaceful sleep I had experienced in years. The morning after my escape, Patricia and I met with Deborah Lancaster, an attorney specializing in elder law whom Harold had recommended. Her office was warm and inviting, designed to put older clients at ease with comfortable seating and good lighting. Deborah herself was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately instilled confidence. "What you've experienced is unfortunately common," she explained after hearing my story and reviewing the photos I had taken of Margaret's documents. "Financial elder abuse is widespread, and when it's perpetrated by family members, it can be particularly complex to address, both legally and emotionally." Deborah explained my options clearly. We could pursue both criminal charges for the theft and fraud, and civil litigation to recover my stolen assets. The power of attorney document, which Deborah strongly suspected was forged, would be a key piece of evidence. "The first step is to revoke any legal authority Margaret might legitimately have," Deborah said, preparing the necessary paperwork. "Then we'll work with a forensic accountant to document exactly what's been taken and how." The next few days were a blur of activity. I established new bank accounts at a different institution, signed documents revoking the questionable power of attorney, and began the process of regaining control over my assets. Patricia extended her stay in Kansas to support me, her presence a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. The forensic accountant Deborah hired, a meticulous man named Robert, uncovered the full extent of Margaret's theft. The total was staggering: over $230,000 stolen through various means. My retirement accounts had been systematically drained, with the funds diverted to accounts in Margaret and Frank's names. My house had been remortgaged, with $150,000 from the equity line of credit deposited directly into their accounts. Most disturbing of all, Robert discovered several credit cards and personal loans taken out in my name, totaling almost $70,000 in debt that I had never authorized or benefited from. The paper trail showed the money had funded renovations to Margaret's home, the down payment on a beach property in Florida, new vehicles, and numerous luxury purchases. "This is textbook financial exploitation," Robert explained, showing me the detailed spreadsheets he had prepared. "They used your good credit and assets to finance their lifestyle while keeping you dependent and in the dark." The emotional impact of seeing the betrayal quantified in dollars and cents was overwhelming. Each transaction represented not just money stolen, but a deliberate choice Margaret had made to harm me for her own gain. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a single desperate act, but a calculated campaign carried out over years. To help process these emotions, Deborah suggested I attend a support group for victims of elder abuse. It was there I met Barbara and Shirley, two women who had experienced similar betrayals by family members. Barbara, a former librarian in her 70s, had been financially exploited by her nephew whom she had raised after her sister's death. "I kept making excuses for him," she confessed during one meeting. "He was going through a rough patch, he would pay me back eventually, he didn't really understand what he was doing. But he knew exactly what he was doing." Shirley, in her 80s, had lost her home to her son and daughter-in-law. "The hardest part," she said, "was accepting that they saw me as a resource to be used, not as a mother to be loved. That realization broke my heart, but it also freed me to take action." Their stories and support helped me see that I wasn't alone and that my situation, while painful, was survivable. They had both taken legal action against family members and were rebuilding their lives with dignity and purpose. Meanwhile, Margaret was not taking my departure quietly. When her increasingly frantic calls and messages went unanswered, she escalated to more concerning tactics. She filed a missing person report with the police, claiming I was mentally incompetent and had wandered away. She contacted local hospitals looking for me. She even showed up at Harold and Susan's house, correctly guessing they might know my whereabouts. Fortunately, Harold had anticipated this and refused to confirm or deny any knowledge of my location. The police, after being contacted by Deborah and confirming I had left voluntarily and was of sound mind, closed the missing person case. Margaret's next move was more calculating. She began contacting my old friends and distant relatives, spinning a tale about my declining mental health and how I had become paranoid, imagining financial exploitation where there was only loving care. She was laying groundwork to challenge my competence if I took legal action. Deborah advised me to undergo a comprehensive cognitive assessment with a geriatric specialist to document my mental capacity. The evaluation confirmed what I already knew, that I was entirely competent and showed no signs of cognitive impairment beyond the minor memory issues normal for my age. "This evaluation will be crucial evidence," Deborah explained. "If Margaret tries to claim you're incompetent, we have independent medical documentation to the contrary." With mounting evidence in hand, Deborah helped me file formal charges against Margaret for financial elder abuse, fraud, and theft. We also filed civil suits to recover the stolen funds and clear the fraudulent debts in my name. The legal wheels turned slowly, but we made steady progress. The district attorney's office took my case seriously, assigning a prosecutor who specialized in elder abuse. The banks and credit card companies, after reviewing the evidence of fraud, began the process of investigating the fraudulent accounts. Margaret's response to the legal actions was both predictable and disappointing. Rather than showing remorse or attempting to make amends, she doubled down on her portrayal of me as confused and ungrateful. Through her attorney, she claimed that all financial transactions had been authorized and were for my benefit, despite the mountain of evidence to the contrary. The situation became even more tense when Margaret violated the temporary restraining order Deborah had obtained after Margaret made a threatening visit to Patricia's hotel. This violation resulted in the restraining order being extended and strengthened, providing some peace of mind as we prepared for court. Throughout this difficult period, I was surprised and touched to receive a secret text message from my granddaughter Abigail, sent from a friend's phone since Margaret had taken away her devices after discovering I had left. "Grandma, are you okay?" The message read. "Mom won't tell us where you are. Just that you're confused and need help. But I heard her and Dad fighting about money and your name kept coming up. I know something's wrong. Please tell me you're safe." Her perceptiveness and concern brought tears to my eyes. I responded carefully, not wanting to put her in the middle of the conflict but needing her to know the truth. "I am safe and well, Abigail. I love you and Ethan very much. This is an adult problem between your mother and me, and none of it is your fault. When this is resolved, I hope to see you both again. Stay strong and know that I'm thinking of you every day." As the court date approached, I worked with a therapist recommended by the Elder Abuse Support Group to prepare emotionally for facing Margaret. The therapist helped me understand that the daughter I thought I knew might never have existed, that the persona Margaret had presented to the world was perhaps always a mask covering her true nature. "You're mourning two losses," the therapist explained. "The financial security that was taken from you, and the daughter you thought you had. Both are profound griefs that deserve to be acknowledged." With each passing day, I grew stronger and more resolved. The woman who had meekly accepted Margaret's control and gaslighting was fading away, replaced by the determined, independent person I had been before grief and manipulation had made me vulnerable. I was ready to face Margaret in court, not just for myself, but for every older person who had been betrayed by those they trusted most. The morning of the court date dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing inside me. Patricia helped me dress in a conservative navy blue suit that we had purchased for the occasion, something that would convey dignity and competence to the judge. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened my pearl earrings, a gift from Richard on our 40th anniversary. "You look strong, Ellie," Patricia said, squeezing my shoulders gently as we stood before the hotel mirror. "Richard would be so proud of you." The thought of Richard gave me courage. He had always believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I could almost hear his voice. "Show them what you're made of, Eleanor." As we prepared to leave for the courthouse, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Frank calling from his office phone, his voice low and strained. "Eleanor, please don't hang up," he said quickly. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to say something before today's hearing." I listened silently, unwilling to make this easier for him. "I knew what Margaret was doing," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I didn't stop it. I benefited from it. There's no excuse for that, none at all. I just want you to know that I'm ashamed of my part in this, and I'm not contesting anything in court today. I've already given my statement to the prosecutor admitting what we did." His confession was both validating and painful. "Why, Frank?" I asked simply. "Why would you both do this?" There was a long pause. "It started small," he finally said. "Just borrowing a little when our business was struggling. Then it got easier and the amounts got bigger. Margaret convinced herself you would never know, that you had more than you needed anyway. I went along with it, told myself it wasn't really hurting you. But that was a lie I told myself to sleep at night." After hanging up, I shared the conversation with Patricia and Deborah, who met us at the hotel. Deborah confirmed that Frank had indeed given a statement to the prosecutor, essentially confirming our case against Margaret. "This significantly strengthens our position," Deborah explained. "But be prepared, Eleanor. Margaret is still denying everything and will likely maintain that stance in court." As we drove to the courthouse, another unexpected call came through. It was Abigail, again using a friend's phone. "Grandma," she whispered, clearly trying not to be overheard. "I just wanted to tell you that Ethan and I are on your side. We've seen how Mom treated you, how she talked to you when she thought we weren't listening. Dad told us a little bit of what's been happening. We love you and we're sorry." Her words meant everything to me. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I assured her. "None of this is your fault. I love you both so much." "Will we still be able to see you after today?" she asked, her voice small and worried. "I hope so, sweetheart," I replied honestly. "No matter what happens with your mom, you and Ethan are still my grandchildren. Nothing will ever change that." The courthouse was imposing, a massive stone building that seemed to emphasize the seriousness of what we were about to do. Inside, the polished hallways echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Our case was scheduled for 10:30 in the morning, and we arrived early to meet with the prosecutor one last time before the proceedings. As we waited outside the courtroom, I saw Margaret for the first time since leaving her house. She was walking toward the courtroom with her attorney, a severe-looking woman in an expensive suit. Margaret was dressed conservatively in a gray dress that made her look older than her 44 years. Her face was set in a cold, determined expression that softened into calculated concern when she noticed me watching. She started to approach me, but Deborah stepped between us, reminding her firmly of the restraining order. Margaret retreated without a word, but the look she gave me was chilling, a mixture of anger and calculation that confirmed I had made the right decision in leaving when I did. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected, intimate almost, with polished wooden benches and the judge's elevated bench at the front. Judge Carolyn Reeves was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. Her reputation, according to Deborah, was one of no-nonsense efficiency and particular intolerance for those who exploited vulnerable populations. As the proceedings began, I sat beside Deborah at the plaintiff's table, with Patricia directly behind me for support. Margaret and her attorney sat at the defense table, with no sign of Frank. The prosecutor, a young but confident woman named Rachel Torres, presented the case against Margaret clearly and methodically. "Your Honor," she began, "this is a clear case of financial elder abuse perpetrated by the defendant against her own mother. Over a period of approximately 2 years, Margaret Jenkins systematically depleted her mother's retirement savings of over $230,000, fraudulently obtained loans and credit cards in her mother's name, and maintained control through isolation and intimidation." Margaret's attorney argued that all financial transactions had been authorized, that I had willingly added Margaret to my accounts, and that the money had been used for my care and benefit. She even suggested that my claims were the result of confusion and possibly the beginning stages of dementia, despite the medical evaluation proving otherwise. The evidence presentation was thorough and damning. Bank records showed the systematic transfers of money. The forensic accountant testified about the detailed tracing of funds from my accounts to Margaret and Frank's personal expenses. The forged power of attorney was examined by a handwriting expert who confirmed it was not my authentic signature. Perhaps most powerful was Frank's written statement, which the prosecutor read aloud. In it, he detailed how Margaret had initially suggested borrowing from my accounts temporarily when their insurance business faced difficulties, but how it had quickly escalated into regular transfers funding their lifestyle upgrades, vacation property, and luxury purchases. Throughout the presentation of evidence, I watched Margaret's face. She maintained a composed expression, occasionally leaning to whisper to her attorney, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands as more and more evidence mounted against her. When Judge Reeves directly questioned Margaret about specific transactions, asking her to explain how a $47,000 withdrawal from my account had benefited me when it had been deposited directly into her beach house escrow account, Margaret's composure finally cracked. "My mother agreed to help us with that property," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "She wanted us to have a family vacation home. Do you have any documentation of that agreement?" Judge Reeves asked, peering over her reading glasses. Margaret fell silent, having no answer. "And can you explain," the judge continued, "why your mother was asking you about this very transaction at dinner the night before she left your home, if she had indeed authorized it?" Again, Margaret had no response. The judge's disgust became increasingly evident as the hearing continued. When Margaret's attorney attempted to question my mental capacity despite the medical evaluation, Judge Reeves cut her off sharply. "Counsel, I have reviewed the geriatric assessment thoroughly. Mrs. Jenkins has been evaluated by specialists and found to be entirely competent. I will not allow you to perpetuate the very gaslighting that your client used to maintain control over her mother." After several hours of testimony and evidence, Judge Reeves delivered her ruling. Her voice was clear and firm as she addressed the courtroom. "This court finds overwhelming evidence of financial elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, and conversion of assets. The defendant, Margaret Jenkins, systematically and deliberately exploited her position of trust to steal from her elderly mother, while keeping her isolated and dependent. She ordered full restitution of all stolen funds, the clearing of all fraudulent debts in my name, and the return of any assets purchased with my money, including Margaret and Frank's interest in the beach property. Additionally, she referred the case for criminal prosecution, suggesting that jail time would be appropriate given the severity and duration of the exploitation. "Mrs. Jenkins," the judge said, looking directly at me with respect in her eyes, "this court commends your courage in coming forward. Elder abuse thrives in silence and shadows, and your willingness to seek justice not only helps you but sends a message to other potential abusers that these crimes will not be tolerated." As we stood to leave the courtroom, I glanced at Margaret one last time. Her face was pale, her expression one of disbelief rather than remorse. She had never expected consequences, had believed her manipulation and threats would continue to protect her. Now facing both financial ruin and potential imprisonment, she finally looked directly at me, but whatever she might have wanted to say remained unspoken as her attorney quickly led her away. Outside the courthouse, standing in the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions, vindication and grief intertwined. I had won, but what I had lost, the daughter I thought I had, could never be recovered. What happens now? I asked Deborah as we walked to the car. "Now we begin the process of recovering your assets," she explained. "It will take time, but the judge's ruling gives us everything we need to proceed, and you can start rebuilding your life on your own terms." Patricia squeezed my hand. "Starting with a visit to Oregon? The guest room is all ready for you." For the first time in years, the future held possibilities rather than fears. I was no longer a victim but a survivor, no longer powerless but in control of my own destiny. The road ahead would not be easy, but I would walk it with my head held high, reclaiming the independence and dignity that had been taken from me. 6 months after the court ruling, I moved into a small but comfortable one-bedroom apartment in a senior living community in Kansas City. It wasn't the house I had shared with Richard, which had been sold to help recover my financial losses, but it was my own space under my control, and it quickly began to feel like home. The process of financial recovery had been complex but successful. With Deborah's expert guidance, we had managed to recover about 70% of what Margaret had stolen. The beach property had been sold, with my portion of the proceeds returned to me. The fraudulent credit cards and loans had been canceled, removing that burden from my credit history. Margaret and Frank's insurance business had been liquidated to contribute to the restitution, though some losses were simply unrecoverable. The criminal case against Margaret had resulted in a plea deal, with her serving 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 5 years of probation. Frank, in exchange for his cooperation, received probation and community service. Their marriage had not survived the scandal and legal proceedings, with Frank filing for divorce shortly after the civil case concluded. My new financial independence came with careful planning. I worked with a financial advisor recommended by Deborah, someone who specialized in helping seniors recover from financial exploitation. We created a secure system with appropriate checks and balances, ensuring that I maintained control while having safeguards in place. My modest remaining retirement funds, combined with my teacher's pension and Social Security, provided enough for a comfortable if not luxurious lifestyle. Rebuilding my social connections proved to be one of the most healing aspects of my recovery. Old friends like Judith welcomed me back into their lives with open arms and no judgment. My bridge club, which I rejoined after a 3-year absence, became a weekly highlight that restored a sense of normalcy and community. I even began volunteering at a local library again, reading to children during story hour, which brought joy back into my life. The most complex aspect of my healing journey involved my relationship with Margaret. The betrayal had cut so deeply that reconciliation seemed impossible, at least for now. I had visited her once in the correctional facility, a strained meeting where she offered excuses rather than a genuine apology. I left that visit with the painful understanding that my daughter still didn't truly comprehend the gravity of what she had done. My relationships with my grandchildren, however, took a more positive path. After careful consultation with therapists specializing in family trauma, I established contact with Abigail and Ethan, who were living primarily with Frank following the divorce. Our reunions were emotional but healing, as I assured them repeatedly that the situation between their mother and me was not their fault or responsibility. Abigail, now 16, showed remarkable maturity in processing what had happened. "I saw things that didn't seem right," she confided during one of our lunch dates. "The way Mom would talk to you when she thought no one was listening. How she would roll her eyes when you asked about your money. I should have said something." "No, sweetheart," I assured her. "You were a child in an impossible situation. Adults made bad choices, not you." Ethan, at 13, struggled more with divided loyalties, but our shared love of old science fiction movies provided neutral ground for rebuilding our relationship. Gradually, both grandchildren became regular visitors to my apartment, sometimes accompanied by Frank, who continued to express remorse for his role in the exploitation. One unexpected outcome of my experience was finding purpose in helping others avoid similar situations. I joined forces with Barbara and Shirley from the support group to create a local elder abuse awareness organization. We began speaking at senior centers, church groups, and community events, sharing our stories and providing practical advice on recognizing the warning signs of financial exploitation. Financial abuse often begins with love and concern, I would explain during these presentations. The offers to help with complicated paperwork, to take over difficult tasks, to provide care, all seem like blessings when you're vulnerable. That's what makes it so insidious, and why it's crucial to maintain some financial independence and transparency, even with those you trust most. Our volunteer work led to partnerships with local law enforcement and adult protective services, creating educational materials that were distributed throughout the community. Seeing the impact of our efforts, how our painful experiences could help protect others, provided a sense of purpose that helped transform my victim status into survivor advocacy. The emotional healing took longer than the practical aspects of recovery. Nightmares about being trapped and powerless gradually gave way to more peaceful sleep. The constant anxiety about financial security slowly eased as I regained control of my resources. The profound sense of betrayal remained a scar rather than an open wound, something I would always carry but which no longer defined me. My therapist helped me understand that forgiveness was a personal journey, not an obligation. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing what happened or maintaining a relationship with someone who harmed you, she explained. Sometimes it simply means releasing the anger so it doesn't consume you, while still maintaining appropriate boundaries. I worked first on forgiving myself for not recognizing the signs earlier, for allowing myself to become isolated and controlled. This self-forgiveness was perhaps the most difficult but also the most liberating aspect of my healing. As for Margaret, I came to accept that I might never understand what had led my daughter to betray me so thoroughly. Whether it was greed, entitlement, or some deeper character flaw I had never recognized, the why mattered less than my response to it. I could choose to let bitterness consume me, or I could choose to rebuild a meaningful life despite the betrayal. I chose the latter path, finding joy in simple pleasures that had once seemed lost to me. Sunday brunches with Patricia, who had moved closer to be near me. Book club discussions that stimulated my mind. The satisfaction of managing my own household again, making decisions about everything from what to have for dinner to how to arrange my furniture. My new life philosophy became trust, but verify, and independence with connection. I learned to balance healthy skepticism with openness to genuine relationships. I discovered that vulnerability and strength could coexist, that asking for help didn't mean surrendering control. 3 years after the court case, I sat on my small apartment balcony watching the sunset, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment of peace. The path had been painful beyond imagining, but it had led to unexpected growth and resilience. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, and built a life I never anticipated having. The phone rang, interrupting my reverie. It was Abigail, calling to confirm our plans to attend her college orientation together the following weekend. Her excited voice, full of plans and possibilities, reminded me that life continues to unfold in unexpected ways, that new chapters begin even after difficult endings. As I watched the final rays of sunlight painting the sky in brilliant colors, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for this hard-won freedom. My story wasn't what I had expected in my retirement years, but it was authentically mine, shaped by both loss and triumph, grief and resilience. If my experience could help even one other person recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation, or find the courage to seek help, then some meaning could be found in the pain. That, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all, that our hardest experiences can become the light that guides others through their own darkness. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself from someone you loved? How did you find the strength to set boundaries when it was painful? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story helped you understand elder financial abuse better, please like, subscribe, and share to help others recognize the warning signs. Remember, protecting your financial independence isn't selfish, it's essential. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always find the courage to stand up for yourself, even when it's difficult.